Hello, 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 everyone. I am excited about this week's series in this video. If this is your first time clicking on my channel or checking out the video, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Kobe Cornell Boone. I am managing director and founder of Boone Capital. We are a Reg D 506C private equity fund focused on real assets. So, all things related to tangible assets such as ranches, land, border, timber, everything that you can see, touch, feel, and all the amazing things that come along with real assets and what happens in the outdoors. So this week, I'm going to be focusing on power, the energy sector, and infrastructure. Man, it's going to be a pretty exciting week. It is something that I am continually having discussions about in regards to one of our current properties that we're underwriting, which is 356 acres in Dallas, Texas. Pretty excited about it with significant water. It was a former rock, sand, and gravel quarry mine. And what I'm going to do this week is really like, I think, debunk and unpack some of the realities of where constraints are happening, where that intersectionality is between land, between power, permitting, compliance, finance, all the complexities that come about that particular arena. And my goal this week is to, one, I think, really provide insights, I think, on the realities of the landscape itself to help to better understand what those tailwinds are, what the headwinds are around regulation and things of that nature as well. And ultimately, I want you to be able to take away from these videos where we are kind of positioned at and how you can strategically look at this particular space that is growing rapidly in an energy sector. Something that I've always been intrigued with, inspired by, and have quite a few friends in that are doing extremely well. So let's dive into today's video, which is AI isn't limited by chips, it's limited by power. And that's a fact, Jack. So let's start off with a couple of key facts and figures that you guys can look to. So first things first, I pulled this directly from IEA. So global data center electricity use is projected to more than double by 2030 to around 945 TWH, according to the International Energy Agency. Another point is that AI is the biggest driver of that data center electricity growth, and U.S. accounts for the largest share of projected increase, which is probably to no surprise to you folks. The U.S. data centers used about 176 TWH in 2023, which was up from 58 TWH in 2014, according to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and the DOE. And I actually pulled that from Berkeley Lab News Center. A few more U.S. data centers could use 325 to 580 TWH by 2028. Potentially, that would be 6.7% to 12% of total U.S. electricity consumption. Pull that directly from the Department of Energy's website, energy.gov. A couple of finance things here. So Goldman Sachs research estimates data center power demand could rise 160% by 2030. And they actually put that out May 13th of 2024. So sure, that's changed. Goldman also forecasts global data center power demand could rise 50% by 2027 and as much as 165% by 2030 versus 2023 levels. And one more, the U.S. Energy Information Administration expects U.S. power consumption to hit record highs in 2026 and 2027, with AI data centers contributing to demand growth. And I pulled that from Reuters. That was actually from their June 9th, 2026 article as well. So a couple of things to pull there from the big dogs, which was Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, U.S. Department of Energy, EIA, Goldman Sachs Research, and IEA. And to kind of get back to our point for the video is that, again, let's kind of start with the principles, if you will. So every AI model requires compute, like it requires compute power, right? Whether that's ChatGPT, Claude, whether you're running Gemini, Enterprise, some other AI applications, whatever the case may be, autonomous systems, whatever the case may be, right? So none of them exist without computing power. And computing power requires servers as of today. Lots of servers, thousands of servers, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of servers. So what most people miss is that these servers don't actually live in the cloud. They live in physical buildings that you can see, touch, and feel. And these buildings are huge. Like you look at what's happening out in Abilene and the huge data center that they're building out there. I think it's called Stargate. And all the infrastructure that's going into place to actually build that out, right? It's physical. It's physical infrastructure. It's land. And every one of those buildings consumes electricity. As I mentioned earlier, the International Energy Agency is estimating that data center electricity demand could more than double over the next several years. And that's even being felt by some of your local real estate folks for those developments that are around those arenas, too, right? So think about that. It's not just a software demand, as we've seen historically, if you will. It's not app downloads, it's not subscriptions, it's power demand, it's electricity demand, and that's kind of where the story starts to get a little more interesting. I would say the chain that most people rarely see is AI requires compute, compute requires data centers require the power, and power requires generation. You have to have some way to generate that power, and that power generation requires the infrastructure. Coming back to our lane, right? Infrastructure requires time, it's land. And that's kind of like the bottleneck, is that the challenge isn't building just another app or some other system. The challenge is building the with speed, right? Speed to lead. The challenge is building the physical systems that support that app, if you will, because unlike software, physical infrastructure, again, it can't be scaled overnight. You're going to need land, you're going to have permits, you're going to have compliance, as I mentioned earlier, engineering, transmission, substations, generation, construction, labor, finance, the capital, right? Which is kind of where we sit. Every one of those pieces, it takes time and years in some cases. So while AI demand is accelerating rapidly, infrastructure development moves at a much slower pace historically. And that gap is creating one of the most important, I believe, investment themes of our, as a millennial, our generation for sure. So the third topic here is, why is power becoming so strategic in a lot of the conferences and conversations I'm listening to? And I believe it's because we're entering a world where access to power becomes a strategic advantage. I have another video that you guys can check out where I talk about water. And I say, hey, I think in the next 20 years, and this is just me, this is my thoughts. I think in the next 20 years, we'll be talking about water the same way we do silver and gold today. Um, just from the standpoint, and it's backed up by, you look at Governor Greg Abbott, who approved, he signed off on I think it was a $20 billion bill back in 2025 to support water infrastructure in Texas. So it is the conversation, if you will. So if you have the capital to build a data center but can't secure power, you don't have a data center. You just don't. If you have customers that can't access generation, you don't have capacity. So in many cases, you could say without that access and that generation, you don't have a project. Everything comes back to the power, and that's why we're seeing discussions around natural gas, nuclear energy, grid modernization, transmission expansion, power storage, utility infrastructure, because all these things ultimately support one goal. That goal is delivering reliable electricity where it's needed, simply put. And the AI race, as we're seeing it from a consumer standpoint, is increasingly becoming a race for energy. Um, I think where land probably starts to make a ton of sense, and why it actually matters a lot more than I think people realize, is that one of the things I've learned while evaluating properties is that not all land is created equal. Like face value, most cases people are looking at the acreage. I want the most acreage, best bang for my buck, cheapest cost per acre, right? But when you're looking at it from an infrastructure standpoint, and really a more institutional standpoint from a capital stack, um, you're looking at access to not just the property itself. That's the bare minimum. We're talking about access to power, access to water, roads, fiber, utilities. 100 acres with infrastructure can be worth dramatically more than 1,000 acres without it, and that's just the reality. I think anybody who could tell you today that's in the land space or owns land, whatever the case may be, that the highest and best use or return rather for your property is always going to be a property that has developmental value, has the bones to be developed, um, not just for residential but commercial, whatever the case may be. That is going to be the highest return, as we have today for your land in general. And every property is not going to be a housing development. Every property is not going to be a shopping mall. Every property is not going to be a hunting track, if you will, a tract of land. There are spaces that this is the highest and best use for. So because infrastructure creates optionality, optionality creates value. As AI grows, I believe that infrastructure adjacent land is going to continue to become increasingly important. And we're seeing that narrative, right? We're seeing that narrative in the news, for one facet or another, wherever you sit on the bench, if you will. But I think the right kind of conversations to have today are and where land conservation, sustainability, regenerative practices, and development, and I would say the powering of our nation in the future can kind of have conversations together and do so in a meaningful and impactful way. So that's just my thoughts on that part of the deal. So last thing I'll kind of touch on here before I get up out of here is what investors may be missing. I think most investors, again, are focused on the obvious winners: chip manufacturers, software companies, AI applications, and many of those businesses do extremely well. Like they're extremely well. But underneath all of that, I think there is another layer, as I mentioned. I think it's the infrastructure layer. I think it's the utilities. Again, going back to generation, transmission, engineering firms, your data center developers, energy providers, your asset owners, even like your real asset, your real estate asset owners. Uh, these people are the ones that are solving the physical constraints, if you will, of this massive growth. And history historically has told us that, enormous value is created by solving those bottlenecks. That is where alpha lies. That is where the upside resides. And right now, the bottleneck isn't intelligence. I think we're just, I would say that we're on the tip of the iceberg, if you will, of the capabilities around AI today. I think the bottleneck is how we power that intelligence. And maybe that's one of the more important conversations we should be having today. So, from this video, the biggest lesson I would say I've learned over the last year really is simple, and that is, everything eventually becomes infrastructure. I don't care what it is you're doing. Technology requires it, economic growth requires it, artificial intelligence requires it, and that infrastructure in today's world has to be powered. And that's why I think the next decade won't just be defined by AI alone. It'll be defined by the physical assets that make that AI possible. So that's going to be back in the wheelhouse of land, energy, data centers, transmission, utilities, power generation, like the infrastructure beneath the headlines, if you will, the stuff that isn't as cool, if you will, to talk about it. You don't see in the headlines as much. And this is the first part. This is the first part of the infrastructure bottleneck economy series that I want to talk about with these things. And in the next video, my goal is to explore deeper into like the land near infrastructure and identifying it, and how it may become more valuable than just the land alone, if you will. So if you guys like this video, I encourage you to like, share, subscribe, send this to someone that you do know. I'll continue building this content out. And man, I'm just super excited about this particular topic, and I think what this series is going to do for sure. So until next time, God bless. Take care.